for one-on-one meetings through the Scheduled Meetings tab found on the conference platform. At this point, I'm very pleased to welcome Andrew Ferrier. He is the Managing Director of Global Uranium and Enrichment, which trades on the OTCQB venture market under the symbol GUELF, and on the ASX under the symbol GUE. Welcome, Andrew.
Thanks, John, for that kind introduction, and thank you everyone for joining. As John mentioned, my name's Andrew Ferrier. I'm the Managing Director of Global Uranium. We're a uranium company focused in North America. Over the next 10 to 15 slides, I'll explain to you how exciting the opportunity is and what we have planned for the next 6 to 12 months. So what is Global Uranium? We're very much focused on uranium in North America. Our flagship asset is our Tallahassee project, which is based in Colorado. We have a JORC-compliant resource there of close to 50 million pounds. It's one of the largest undeveloped uranium deposits there in the US. We've had some incredibly positive drilling results from that project, which we recently drilled, and I'll walk you through that in the coming slides. Very excitingly, we also have a scoping study coming out on that project in the next couple of months. On top of that, we have our Maybell project in Colorado, which is very timely as we have drill rigs heading to site as we speak. We plan to drill 15,000 feet there into Maybell. It's a historic uranium producer. We're very excited about some of the near shallow high-grade targets on that project. Outside the US, we also have a substantial position in the Athabasca Basin. We have close to 60,000 hectares there. And we've held those properties now for around 12 to 24 months, done extensive airborne programs on particularly our Noonan and Perch projects, which I'll go into more detail. And they have very exciting shallow basement-style hosted uranium exploration targets. The third stool to global uranium is actually we've made an investment over 12 months ago into a company called Uranium. Now, Uranium is focused on chemical uranium enrichment. They're based in Australia. They're a private company, and the enrichment landscape, as we'll touch on, is an incredibly fascinating piece of the nuclear cycle at the moment, and one that's getting a significant amount of attention, including funding as well. We are listed on the OTC. We're an ASX listed company also. We're well funded. We raised money earlier in the year. And as we'll see in the next couple of slides, we're very excited about what the uranium market's going to look like over the next 6 to 12 months. I'm sure a lot of people on this call are potentially from the US, but the US, it's really important to say the US is still the world's biggest consumer of uranium. It has more nuclear reactors than any other country, but its domestic market in terms of producing yellowcake has fallen away dramatically since around the 1980s. And because of that, the US has become very, very reliant on foreign material coming into the country, particularly yellowcake and enriched uranium. But obviously, there's been bipartisan support to help fix that problem. And you've seen legislation passed very recently, which is to ban Russian enriched uranium coming into the country. There's been significant funding bills also passed initially in the Inflation Reduction Act. And all this is set to bolster the US nuclear industry. Nuclear is going to be fundamental to green energy moving forward. It truly is the only clean, safe baseload power out there. Nearly all, outside of Australia, unfortunately, nearly all the top 20 economies around the world are now very focused on nuclear. And that's changed dramatically over the last 5 years. So where we sit with Global Uranium, we are focused on continuing to develop our uranium projects in the US, exploring in the Athabasca, and then developing our enrichment technology also. These are a snapshot of these projects. I'll just give you a rough, snapshot of what we have. I've also already mentioned Tallahassee and Maybell, which are in Colorado. We also have the Rattler project, which is in the LaSalle district in Utah. LaSalle is a very well-known, produced significant amount of uranium through past uranium booms over a long period of time. And LaSalle is actually, we've got the the eastern extension of the Energy Fuels ground, which is going back into production as we speak now. And uranium ore from the Energy Fuels LaSalle projects will go down to the White Mesa mill. So we're in the best parts of the US, and we're going to continue to develop those assets. This is an overview or a snapshot of our Tallahassee projects. The key thing to take away from Tallahassee is its scale. We have a JORC compliant resource here of close to 50 million pounds. The entire district is closer to 90 million pounds. There's been small, very high grade production here in previous operations, but where Tallahassee probably got the most attention was back in the 1970s and 1980s. And we're blessed with all that information. Cypress, there's over 2,000 drill holes, 350,000 meters of information we already have on this project. Cypress, in the late 1970s, got a full-blown mine permit to mine the Hanson deposit, which you can see down here in the sort of kidney-shaped part of the Tallahassee districts. They were going to mine that as an open pit and underground operation. We've picked up this project for a series of transactions recently. Very excited about what we've had. We did an 8-hole program, which on the next slide, I'll go through some of the results, which are excellent. The purpose of that program wasn't to make the resource bigger or to do any infill drilling. It does get some additional core to do some additional met test work, which is going to feed into a scoping study. That scoping study is on track, getting worked on at the moment. We plan on getting that out to the market in Q3 2024. So that's sort of the end of September, a few months away, and we're pretty excited to get that out to the market. This is a long section of the Tallahassee projects, and it's a great demonstration of why the project is so good. We drilled 8 holes here, and just look at some of the thicknesses of mineralization and the grades we were getting. So, we're getting 66 meters of 0.12% uranium, right? 66 meters is close to 150 feet of mineralization at those grades. In the US, they're excellent grades. They talk, in uranium space, you talk about grade and thickness. You need both of them at the same time to have an economic deposit. And we have them we have a huge amount of good, thick, high-grade results on top of the two, which basically confirms the 2,000 meters of drilling that we already have. So if you compare those grades to other projects in the US, but in particular in Australia, and even more so in Africa, we are sitting on a high-grade project here of significant scale. And I guess that's why we're so keen to get this scoping study out, so we can demonstrate to the market, the economic rationale for this project moving forward in a landscape of the world being short uranium, in a backdrop of the US being desperate to boost domestic production. So this is the right time and the right place for this Tallahassee projects. Moving on from Maybell, I mentioned, moving on from Tallahassee, I mentioned the Maybell projects. We've picked this project up. This is one project we spent a lot of time on last year, basically digging up additional geological data on the project. Each one of those little dots you see there on this map, which can be a little bit hard to see, is drill data we now have information on. So Maybell was mined through 2 periods of time. It's produced over 5 million pounds. It was a pretty substantial producer and had grades of over 1,000 ppm. We put out an exploration target on this project based on just the historical data that we pulled together over the last 12 months. We think, potentially there could be 4 to 13 million pounds of shallow high-grade mineralization here. And I think that's why we're so excited that we're going to be drilling on this project literally in the next couple of weeks. We're going to be drilling 15,000 feet. The objective of this program is twofold. One is to sort of confirm that shallow high-grade mineralization which was left behind by the previous operations. We think there's substantial pounds to be found there. But the sort of secondary reason why we're keen to drill Maybell is to drill some deeper holes. We believe there may be a much bigger, lower grade mineralization in what's called the Lower Browns Formation. So we're going to start by drilling some reasonably deep holes. And when I refer to deep holes, that's only a relative phase relative to most of the other drilling which we'll do, which is very shallow. But we're looking to hit that very substantial mineralization, which you see talked about in historical reports, and see what we can find down there. But it's very exciting times, and we'll be joining this project in the next couple of weeks, as I said. Moving north of the border, we're now in Canada. These are our Athabasca projects. The Athabasca is, for lack of a better phrase, a elephant country for the uranium space. It obviously has the world's biggest, highest grade uranium deposits. We're very blessed to have 6 projects in the Athabasca Basin. You can see them in blue on the screen in front of you. The projects we've had the most focus on over the last 6 to 12 months have been our Newnham and Perch projects. You can see them up here in the northeast. Newnham is a substantial project which has got a lot of attention in the past and had a reasonably significant amount of drilling on that project. But what's fundamentally changed is just the style of projects people are looking for in the Athabasca. Major discoveries by NextGen and Fission really highlighted the potential of sort of basement-style hosted deposits. So before that, nearly all the uranium in the Athabasca was in the unconformity in the sandstone, which sits above the basement rock. So what basically happened on the Newnham project is all the drilling drilled through the unconformity, and when it hit the basement rock, they basically pulled up the drill rig at that point in time. And they had really interesting sniffs of uranium, but what we know now, and adding all the work we've done in terms of getting geos on the ground, doing additional airborne work on that Newnham project, is that we've got 10 to 12 walk-up drill targets. We're talking about shallow exploration targets. We're talking about in the first 50 to 150 meters, we'll be hitting those targets in the basement rock. So we're very excited about that. There's no plans to drill because the North American Summer is essentially past us to execute on a drill program at Newnham this summer, but that's something we'll be very focused on achieving in this upcoming North American winter. And then on to the sort of the third leg to the stool in the global uranium story. And this is the one we get a lot of questions about and a lot of excitement about, the sort of understanding and importance of enrichment in the nuclear cycle has manifested itself significantly over the last couple of years. Most of the Western world has become acutely aware that it's become reliant on Russian enriched uranium to fuel its nuclear reactors. That is obviously not a good energy security policy moving forward. And as I mentioned at the start of the presentation, the US is acting on this as we speak. And there's significant funding here here in the US. I say that I'm currently based in Australia, but for most people listening, I'm sure that context is right. Huge amount of funding going into this as we speak, in particularly into innovation in the enrichment space. So what we have is in Global Uranium, we're the largest shareholder of a company called Uranium. Uranium is focused on a chemical enrichment technology. And it's really important to mention that as a chemical enrichment technology, one, to just differentiate itself from how currently enrichment occurs, which is through centrifuges, and how other technologies, and then one of the most advanced other technologies out there is through another ASX is a company called Silex, which has GLE, which is a laser-based enrichment technology in the US. Uranium's chemical enrichment technology is different to both of them. It has some real interesting characteristics which give it what we believe are some pretty inherent advantages over both the existing technologies and others out there. And one of them, as an example, it's hard to go through it all on a short presentation, but just it being a chemical enrichment technology means that the prior step to all chemical enrichment today is basically the conversion of yellow cake into a gaseous product, because both centrifuges and laser require gaseous products. Or Uranium being a chemical enrichment technology, that's not a required step. So you're effectively removing another key step and constraint in that nuclear fuel cycle, which is that conversion step. So that's just one example. Uranium are progressing that technology here in Australia, down at ANSTO, which is in southern Sydney. The technology is being classified by the Australian government close to 4 to 5 years ago, and we're very excited about it. They continue to tick goals on a technical basis, and we'll continue to enjoy where the Uranium story continues to go moving forward. In terms of our market cap and share price, as you can see, we've got good funds to execute on all the programs I spoke about here over the last 15 to 16 minutes. Our share price has sort of moved very aggressively and strongly northwards when the uranium markets moved in sort of January, February this year. But with the uranium price sort of settling back down into sort of that mid $80 per pound range, as sort of we have sort of drifted or sort of been relatively flat stock over the 6 months, which has been, I guess, in some ways a little bit disappointing given how much positive news we'll put out in the market and the great sort of backdrop that we have moving forward. But we'll continue to execute on that program. We also have a lot going on with the projects we have. We're also very aggressive and proactive, I guess, from other projects that we're looking at in this landscape, particularly uranium projects in North America. That's where our experience is as a team. And it's quite, in some ways, such a great opportunity that you can get all those assets I've spoken about, which currently sit in a company which has a market cap of $18 million. And it's well funded. So there's a huge opportunity there. We don't, get much of an opportunity to market in the US. We'd obviously like to do so. It's a story that resonates well here in the US, and we'll continue to do that moving forward. We have a really important slide on the team. We're a very small team. We're a nimble team. I myself, and Fabrizio, the chairman, are based in Sydney. But probably more importantly, Tim Brown and Jim Villeneuve are based in the US. They both live in Colorado. Jim and I have worked extensively together on other uranium projects in the US over the last 10 to 15 years. Jim was responsible for permitting the Reno Creek mine. So we have in-house expertise on permitting uranium projects in the US, and there haven't been many of them done over the last year. So even though we've got a small team, we're very good looking at projects, and we know how to deal with all stakeholders and move projects forward here in the US. So this is my a summary slide, and then we'll jump into Q&A. But I'll just sort of reiterate a lot of things we spoke about before in terms of, we have the Tallahassee project. We have an existing drill compliant resource there of 50 million pounds. We're in the progress of putting out a scoping study on that project in Q3. It's one of the larger undeveloped uranium projects in the US. On top of that, we're going to be drilling on our Maybell project, focused on shallow, high-grade material, but also some pretty interesting exploration potential in the Lower Browns Formation there as well. We also have our projects in the Athabasca, which we're, have drill walkout-ready targets on, particularly our Newnham and Perch projects. And we're excited about pushing those projects forward in the next 6 months. And then we've got a very strategic investment in Uranium, which is in the enrichment landscape, which is one of the most interesting parts of the nuclear cycle moving forward. That all sits in a uranium market, which we expect to go a lot higher over the next 3 to 6 months. We've seen a little bit of a pause in the uranium price movement since it ran reasonably aggressively in January, February this year. We think that's probably healthy. There's a fundamental structural supply deficit in the uranium market, which means the uranium price can only head in one direction. And we are just pulling global uranium into position to maximize the benefit of our shareholders moving forward. So I'll pause there, and maybe I can jump back onto the camera and find some of these questions to dig out. Sorry, I'm just looking for the Q&A. Okay. Sorry. On one case, the first question I see here is, can you discuss your milestones for the next year and capital needs to support? So we went through this in terms of we are well funded. We raised $6.5 million at the start of the year. It was a good time in terms of the market to raise that money. That money will see us through to the end of the year. It's allowed us to drill at Tallahassee. It's allowed us to complete this scoping study and focus on that drilling at Maybell as well. And obviously, Uranium is its own company, which is in a well-funded position as well. So there's no immediate or medium-term needs for capital, and we're just executing on the program we outlined to our shareholders early on in the year. So we're going to have plenty of milestones. There's going to be plenty of drill results coming out. We've recently just completed our drill program at Tallahassee, going to be drilling at Maybell, and going to be getting out scoping studies on top of any of the interesting opportunities we see in front of us as well. Next question. Is the US government going to do anything to compress timelines for uranium projects? It's a great question, and we've recently seen in the last 24 to 48 hours discussions being held about compressing timelines around critical minerals projects in the US, and sort of guaranteeing some timelines, which is a huge and right direction for the government to be moving forward. We obviously sit here with our Tallahassee project. We obviously have an exploration permit to continue to drill on that project. But the next logical step as we continue to work through all that information is to continue to advance and de-risk that project. And obviously timelines in terms of advancing uranium projects are a really important thing that the government should be focused on in terms of helping to boost and advance its own projects that's in its own backyard. And we'll also be very supportive of that moving forward as well. Next question. Is the Tallahassee project amenable to ISR? It's a really good question. Thank you to whoever asked it. So our project in Tallahassee is a very substantial. It's a reasonably, well, it is a shallow deposit. When we're completing this scoping study at the moment, we're looking at underground techniques to mine the Tallahassee project. There's been a lot of test work done in the past on ISR mining. What we're focused now, though, moving forward is underground techniques. Given those thicknesses and grades I discussed based on our recent drilling, and also, which confirms all the historical data we have, given those grades and those thicknesses, we think this is very much going to be an underground project moving forward. And I think you'll see the reasons for that when we get the scoping study out. I don't see. I think there's one more question here. Will you be able to access the development money the US government has committed to domestic supply? And where do you need to be on your project timeline to access these funds? That's a good question in terms of development money for the US government. So at this point in time, a lot of the funding that's gone into the nuclear space has been very much focused on the latest stage of the nuclear cycle. In terms of initially in the Inflation Reduction Act, it was basically defined to provide tax incentives to essentially the nuclear reactors to make sure that they were, economically sustainable for many decades forward to come. The most recent round of funding that you've seen has very much been focused on the enrichment side of the market. There's a lot of money going in there, obviously, to look to bolster domestic capabilities in the enrichment space, and also a lot of it's gone into innovation in that enrichment space as well. So when you say, are we going to be able to access that development money? If you think about uranium projects at the moment, there's no pot of gold there in terms of providing money to help develop those projects. The US government through the DOE has provided some contracts to companies which are in near-term production. which is one way of helping those projects. So that's something we're obviously keeping it very close on, and obviously that's going to be a huge help potentially moving forward also. So I'll cut it off there. I think that's a few great questions, and hopefully I provided some reasonable answers. And I really appreciate everyone's time. Hopefully, and if you have any more questions, we're obviously ASX as a company, but I'm very keen to continue to tell the story in the US. There's an email address there and our website there. And look, if you call that number or send that an email to that email address, we'll very quickly